Welcome to Rewatch and Rank. On this channel, we rewatch older TV shows, provide a summary and opinion on the episode before ranking each episode against each other. Today's episode is Criminal Minds, Season 2, Episode 13, No Way Out. Episode in a nutshell is a brief reminder of what happened in the episode. So in this episode, it starts with Jason and Derek walking into a diner. Jason sits in front of a man named Frank, who turns out to be a serial killer. We then have a series of flashbacks to how they found Frank and what Frank is after. Those flashbacks relate that the team has discovered that there is a rather prolific serial killer who's been basically crossing the country for 30 years, killing people, and he always returns to the same small town, but they don't believe he lives there. When they get to the town, the sheriff greets them, and they do their investigations. As they're investigating, they find, well, basically, the sheriff gets kidnapped. They find out the serial killer almost killed a woman named Jane years ago, but because she didn't give him the fear he got off on, and in fact told him he had beautiful eyes, even as he was about to torture and kill her, he ended up feeling something he'd never felt before, decided it was love, and let her go. And he continues to go to that town in order to leave her gifts of wind chimes made out of rib bones, from all of the victims that he's had on the way and on the way back. And he makes this trip yearly. And ultimately, this leads to her thinking that she was abducted by an alien, and the entire town thinks that she's crazy. But in the end, in order to get the sheriff back, they give him Jane, except they manage to save the sheriff, but Jane wants to go with him and decides she's in love with him too. Um, But of course, he's surrounded by cops. They're in a diner. How does he get away? Well, he made preparations in advance and took a bus full of young children who were on a field trip, and he hid it somewhere in the desert so that it's basically the children die of exposure and you never find them in this desert, or you let me show you where it is and then let me go with Jane. And so ultimately, the FBI decides to prioritize the children since Jane is leaving of her own free will. And they, of course, once they find the children, then send out search parties, know that he went west. But again, he was prepared. The tracks only go so far, then they disappear. And Jason, at the end of the episode, vows that he will find him again. But that is essentially what happens in this episode. So now that we've been reminded about what happened in the episode, it is time to rank the episode first on the mostly objective ranking, followed by the personal ranking list. We start with our single episode supporting character introductions. Sheriff Georgia Davis is the one who gets kidnapped and initially is the one who leads the investigation. However, by the time we're into the present day, it is Deputy Rick Silo who is leading the investigation, and that is because Sheriff Georgia Davis has been kidnapped, and so he's there, and he is very willing and happy to kill Frank even if they don't find the sheriff. He basically tells the FBI they've got 15 minutes or they're going in guns a-blazing because how dare he steal the sheriff. They're worth 1 point each, so that's 2 points. Then we have the multi-episode supporting character introductions, which is Frank Britkoff and Jane Hanratty, who are both worth 2 points because they will appear again in the episode where Frank is caught, as Jason had promised he would be. That's 2 points each, so a total of 4 plus the previous 2 is 6. And that brings us to the final points that I was giving, which was 4 points for the fact that this is a memorable episode. As soon as they walked into the diner, I was like, I totally remember everything about this episode. So, Potentially because it is a two-parter, it is a more compelling story, which is also probably what makes it memorable. Either way, like I said, 4 more points, which ultimately does bring us to a 10 out of 10. Now, I do want to honorably mention, I did consider taking 2 points for negative messaging or behavior in the fact that they let a serial killer go, but ultimately, the reason I didn't take the points is I ultimately feel it was the better decision because, I mean, children could die of exposure to the town pretty much because it's such a small town, all of the children of the town at stake. And I feel like ultimately I'd probably make the same choice to save the children over a woman who willingly wants to go away with the serial killer. However, it is a fact that letting a serial killer go means that you are basically responsible for anybody he kills from that point forward. Though, given it's a love story, maybe he's not planning to kill more. Who knows? Either way, because I feel like I would have made the same decision, I feel like it was the right decision, even though it was a decision between like a rock and a hard place, like where neither option was a good one. I decided not to take the points because I feel like out of the two options, bad as they both were, they did make the better option. So it is still a 10 out of 10, but I wanted to honorably mention I could have taken those points if I had wanted to. And so that brings us to our mostly objective ranking, where we have North Mamon in first, Profiler profiled. This episode came in third, No Way Out. It is in third because when more than one episode has the same score, we rank in episode order. Then we have The Fisher King 2, Aftermath, Empty Planet, The Perfect Storm, The Boogeyman, The Last Word, Lessons Learned, P911, Sex, Birth, Death, and then in 13th, Psychodrama. My personal ranking for this episode ultimately ended up being a 7 out of 10. It was memorable, but it also to a certain extent was kind of boring because most of it was them either in the diner having like a conversation back and forth or, flashbacks telling how they caught it. And personally, I'm just not a fan of nonlinear narratives. I prefer to follow from beginning to end. I don't really like where you start in the middle and then go back to the beginning and then finally get to the end. I just feel, like I said, it's not a personal preference to me. So because this is the personal list, I didn't like the nonlinear narrative of it. Like I said, they had a choice to make between two difficult decisions. And it just happens to be that, again, any killings that Frank may do after this point, the blood is on Jason's hands too, because he let him go with Jane. They even suspect, he even warns Jane when she's willing to go with him that this guy can't feel love and once whatever he's feeling is done, you're done. And she did not listen to that. But again, she made her own choice with her own free will, so that was what she wanted to do. It is a two-parter episode, though the second part is several episodes ahead. But yeah, I felt like it was a very good episode with the tension. I did like the characters. I did ultimately like the overall story, but I don't like non-linear narratives. Didn't like the decisions that they made, even though I acknowledge that it was the better of two bad decisions. And overall, I felt like it was just above meh. There was enough above meh to give it a 7 and not a 5, but it's not a favorite of mine. Which ultimately brings my list then to Profiler Profiled, North Mamon, Aftermath, The Boogeyman, Psychodrama, The Last Word, The Fisher King 2. This episode, No Way Out, is in 8th place for me, followed by Sex, Birth, Death, Empty Planet, The Perfect Storm, Lessons Learned, and P911 in last place so far. Which brings us to the series ranking so far. And on our mostly objective ranking, we have season 2 now at 85 out of 230, Personal ranking, Season 2 has 102 out of a possible 230, and Season 1, of course, is in first place on both lists so far. But with that, we have now rewatched and ranked Criminal Minds Season 2, Episode 13, No Way Out, in which there actually was a way out. Like and subscribe if you'd like to, and I'll see you in the next episode.